One hesitation you might have when working with utilities this way is that you end up with a lot of classes in your HTML, and that this could lead to potential maintenance issues if you need to update the same combination of utility classes in many places at once. Now, I would argue that a lot of what we're doing here, like setting the max width for some content or assigning a height to an image, is pretty context dependent, and there aren't really many useful abstractions we could introduce here beyond what we already have. But then there's things like this link down here that we have styled like a button. This has something like 15 classes on it, and buttons are the sort of thing that you could easily imagine yourself wanting to reuse in many places on the site. To avoid potential duplication issues here, Tailwind provides the special apply directive, which you can use to compose a group of utilities into a reusable component class. I'll show you how it works. The first thing we're going to do is select all of the classes in this long class list here and head over to our tailwind.css file. Next, I'm going to create a new class in between Tailwind components and Tailwind utilities, and I'm going to call it .btn for button, kind of like the button class from Bootstrap that you might be familiar with. Now I'm going to type @apply, which is Tailwind's special apply directive here, and then I'm going to paste the entire list of classes that we copied from our HTML. Now, apply doesn't currently support using utilities that have variant prefixes like SM or hover or focus or anything like that. So I'm going to cut those out for now, and we'll talk about how to tackle those in a minute. So let's delete all of these hover styles, active styles, and focus styles. Next, let's go ahead and rebuild our CSS. Now, since we're going to be working with our CSS quite a bit in this lesson, instead of manually rebuilding it over and over again, why don't we add a quick watch script so that our CSS will automatically rebuild anytime we make any changes. So here in our package.json file, I'm just going to duplicate our build script. I'm going to call it watch, and then I'm just going to add the -- watch flag to the end. And this is just a feature of PostCSS CLI that will handle all the file watching for us. Now, if we head over to the terminal, we should be able to run npm run watch and have a nice watch script running that'll automatically rebuild our CSS anytime we tweak it in any way. Okay, great. Now let's check out our built CSS file. So if we head over to public tailwind.css and we do a search for .btn, you can see that we have this new button class that contains all of these styles that you might recognize as being all of the styles that would be added by the utilities that we applied to this component class. So it works a lot like a mix-in that you might be familiar with from Sass, except instead of mixing in things that are explicitly declared as mix-ins, you're able to mix in existing utility classes. Let's go ahead and add back our hover and focus styles and stuff like that. So here in our tailwind.css file, all we need to do is declare a few more selectors. So I'm going to declare button hover, I'm going to declare button focus, and I'm going to declare button active. Now we can use apply inside each one of these selectors to reapply the styles that we were using under those specific conditions. So for hover, we want to apply BG indigo 400 to make the background color a little bit lighter. And on focus, we wanted to apply outline none and shadow outline. And on active, we wanted to apply BG indigo 600 to make the background color a little bit darker. Now for changing the text size at the small breakpoint, you might think that we'd have to write something like media min width 640 pixels, which is the breakpoint that we're targeting, and then say button apply text base. And this will totally work, but it introduces this magic number into your CSS. And if you ever customize this breakpoint in any way, you'd have to come back to your CSS and manually replace every instance of this value. So to make this a little bit easier, Tailwind provides the @screen directive, which lets you reference Tailwind's breakpoints by name. So we can just say screen SM, and now when this is compiled, Tailwind will automatically expand this into the correct breakpoint. Let's go and check out our compiled CSS so we can see this in action. So you can see now we have our hover styles, our focus styles, our active styles, and the expanded breakpoint declared. Okay, now that we've got all these styles in place, we can go and remove all of the utility classes from the HTML and replace them with simply btn. And now you see over here, now that everything's refreshed, everything still works the same. Our hover styles work, our active styles work, our focus styles work, everything's looking good. So one thing that I think is important to talk about a little bit is why we made sure to write these rules in between Tailwind components and Tailwind utilities. The reason for this is to make sure that even when you're using a class like .btn, you can still layer utility classes on top of it if you needed to tweak it in any way. For example, say we wanted to give this button a little bit of extra horizontal padding like px8. Because of the fact that we have button declared before the utilities, we can easily add px8 here and it'll actually take. So you can see the button actually gets wider. If we decided to put these button declarations after Tailwind utilities, Even after adding px8, this px5 definition would override the px8, so you wouldn't be able to add any utilities that tweak any of the styles that are baked into the button class. Now on that note, I think there are a couple things that we do have baked into this button class that might make more sense to leave to utilities. The first one that stands out to me is this media query here. I don't know that you'd always want to change the font size of every single button on your site whenever the viewport got bigger. I think this is the sort of thing that you might want to do on some buttons, but not on others. So why don't we delete this definition here and reintroduce it as a utility in our HTMLs. We'll say small text base. Similarly, this shadow here, I don't know that we'd want to have a shadow on every single button on the site either. It might be just something that we add when we want to emphasize a particular button. So I'm going to remove shadow LG here and reintroduce this as a utility as well. Now, one thing to be careful of when using the apply feature with Tailwind is making sure you're not accidentally trading one type of duplication for a different type of duplication. I'll show you what I mean. Say we needed another button on this screen, maybe like a secondary button where we had some text like learn more. And instead of being a primary indigo button like this, we wanted it to be like a secondary gray button or something. Let's head over to our CSS and create another variant of this button. So you might think, okay, let's just duplicate all these button styles and maybe we'll rename this first one to be button indigo. And let's change the second definition to maybe be like button gray. Now, instead of making this one have an indigo background with white text, maybe this is like a gray 400 background with like a gray 800 text. And then for the hover state, maybe that gets a little bit lighter, so gray 300. And then for active, it gets a little bit darker, so say gray 500. Let's head over to our HTML and make the necessary changes. So we'll change this first one to be button indigo and the second one to be button gray. And now I think this button actually looks kind of bad with this shadow, especially since it's a secondary button. So we can remove this utility and feel sort of validated that extracting the shadow from the button was probably a good idea. Okay, so looking at these buttons, it seems like everything's good, right? They both have their own styles. Everything seems to be working. The classes are nice and simple and extracted. No problems, right? Well, say we wanted to change the padding on both of these buttons. We'd have to go to our CSS file and edit the padding for both the button indigo class and the button gray class. And this is what I mean by trading one form of duplication for another. We've extracted these component classes, but there's actually duplication within them that can create different types of maintenance issues. So to solve this, we can use what's often referred to as a multi-class component pattern. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new class up here called button, just sort of reintroducing this base button class. I'm going to copy this apply directive, and I'm going to remove anything from it that's very specific to just this indigo variant. In this case, I think that's only the background color here and the text color. Now let's take a look at the button indigo definitions here and see if there's anything else that's common between both variants. The thing that stands out to me is the focus styles. We're just doing outline none, shadow outline on both of these. So why don't we also add some focus styles to our base button? So we'll get rid of indigo here, keep this as it is, and now we can go through the indigo variant and the gray variant and remove anything that's already covered by this button class. So first I'm going to remove these focus styles, and I'll remove that from both variants. And then we just have to remove everything except the colors. So we can remove all of the block and positioning stuff, we can remove the text size, and we can remove all this stuff at the end. So all we really need to specify here is indigo 500 for the background and white for the text. Now we can do the same thing for this gray button, just keeping the colors. And now we have very simple definitions for these two variants. You can see it's very clear what's different between them because the only things we specify are the things that aren't the same. Now if we head back to our index.html file, all we have to do is re-add this button class to both links, and now we're back to where we started. So apply is a cool feature of Tailwind that can be really useful when you want to extract repeated combinations of utility classes, but I would caution you not to get carried away. In my experience, it's most useful for things like buttons or form elements, the sort of thing that are just single HTML tags and things that you repeat many times throughout your site. For anything that's more complicated than just a single HTML tag, there's a better way to handle potential duplication problems, and we'll talk about that in the next lesson.